my current project is actually a viola album, and so today I'm excited to give you all a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what it's like to write and record your own song. So one of the things that I usually start with actually is I brainstorm for ideas, and what I usually like to start with is some kind of melody or small idea that starts off with it's the basis for the whole song. So one of the first couple of things I ask myself is what key and what kind of tempo do I want to be in. So for this particular song that I've been working on, I chose to be in the key of D minor, and I kind of wanted it to be more of an up-tempo, faster song. So usually what I would do is start around playing some scales and arpeggios, and eventually one of the ideas that I came up with was this one. So that on its own is just a small idea, but it's enough to get started and to let the other ideas flow from that. So the next thing that's really important is to find a groove. So I practiced this with a metronome. You can hear I use Ableton Live, and in this software it actually comes with a built-in metronome. So for example, you can hear the ticking, so that's my quarter note. So I would work to record just this melody by itself. So now that we have the main melodic idea figured out for the song, the next thing that I usually like to work on is actually the drums to help give the track more of a sense of rhythm, pulse, and momentum. So the drum beat itself is often made out of many different individual drum hits, such as a kick drum, a snare, or a clap, hi-hats, cymbals, etc. And for me, I usually start with one or two, usually a kick drum and either a snare or a clap, to outline the most important beats of each measure. So on the downbeats and some offbeats, what I usually use is the kick drum, which sounds like this. And then as kind of almost with playing a duet with that, or a counter melody or counter rhythm is the snare. And so the snare along with that will sound like this. And then once we have the main groove figured out from those two instruments, we can add more subdivisions via the hi-hats, which gives it more of a sense of motion. And then once we have the drum beat this far along, what I usually do is add one or two other sounds, the purpose of which is to indicate when is each phrase or group of measures coming to an end. So for this beat, I use a tambourine every couple of measures to signal this is the end of one unit of a phrase. So with the tambourine, the drum beat sounds like this. Great. So now that we have the drum beat figured out, I usually move next to the bass. So the bass, I think, should always complement your melody and your drums in their own ways. So I usually like to keep it pretty simple. I usually stick to an arpeggio or a few notes outside of the arpeggio at most, and make sure that the rhythm of it lines up with the rhythm of the drums. So the bass lined up with the drums and the melody for this track will sound like this. So now we're getting pretty far along into the track, and one of the things that I like to add now to kind of finish or fill it out is some harmonies. So the instrument that I decided in this song to use is a piano, because I figured that a piano is often a pretty classic or traditional accompaniment instrument for a string instrument, so I thought it could sound good in this context as well. So the piano groove that I worked on sounds a little bit like this. And along with all of the other instruments together, we now have this. now that we have all of that figured out, we're at a point with the track where it's time to add the solo line, which in some songs might be a vocalist or a rapper, but in this case, since I'm making a viola album, that's actually going to be me performing on the viola. Now, for recording the main instrument or the solo line for the track, I wanted to make sure that it somehow, again, complements the track while still standing out and being the thing that you hear as a listener as being the primary musical idea that's happening. So for this, I actually started again with some improvisation starting on the main loop that you heard me play earlier. So the improvisation, it starts off the same and then diverges a little bit. What you'll hear, it sounds like this. And going on from there. So a couple of things that you want to think about with creating your main line, your main solo line, is, again, does it make sense in the context of the rest of the track? But also, what can you do to add variety? So after, in addition to changing the actual melody to the extent that I did, you can also think about other things such as rhythm, space, and registers. So for example, what I did later on, you'll hear me go down lower to the D and G strings as well. And so that serves as a contrast to the idea you heard before. But also you want to think about the idea of balance and form in your melody. So after diverging from my first idea in the melody, I come back to it later. So after a couple of these, I go back to the first melody. And so on. So with that, you've pretty much heard all of the things that I go through when composing and recording the actual track. There's a lot of other things that happen afterwards in the mixing and mastering stage that I'm not going to be going into right now, but I hope this is enough to give you an idea of kind of what the process is.